Hi everyone, this is a review video for Unit 6 in your biology course, just in preparation for the MCAS that you will be taking in June. So this unit is relatively short, but we're going to cover just some of the main topics or review some of the main topics of this unit. That would be photosynthesis, ATP, and cellular respiration, and how carbon cycles through the earth. And then we'll look at just a couple of practice problems that are actually MCAS questions on these topics. So let's start with photosynthesis. This is a metabolic process that plants and some small amount of photosynthetic bacteria do. And this is a metabolic process that is done in order to make food for that cell, food in the form of glucose, a sugar. All right, now animals, they will consume or eat food in order to get this glucose, but plants aren't doing that. They're not consuming something for the most part. We know there's a few exceptions, right, with the Venus flytrap, but plants need a way to actually get food and they can't consume it. And so what they do is this process of photosynthesis where they use some molecules, do this metabolic process of photosynthesis, and then they're able to create this glucose, a bunch of glucose molecules that they will then use for cell respiration, which we'll get to in a little bit. So let's just look at what are the three main things that are needed for photosynthesis. Well, one of the first things the plant needs is water, H2O. And so plants are going to get water through the roots. They're going to pull in those water molecules from whatever precipitation has fallen into the ground. What else do plants need? They actually also need carbon dioxide. And so carbon dioxide is going to come in through the leaves. Plants have these little holes called stomata on the bottom of their leaves. And so carbon dioxide will just go right through those holes when they're open, and that's how they get into the plant. And we have carbon dioxide all around, so it's pretty readily available. And what is the third thing that plants need in order to do this process of photosynthesis? Well, they need sunlight. And so sunlight also is pretty readily available. That comes from the sun. And so the plant has molecules inside of them, pigment molecules like chlorophyll, that have the ability to absorb sunlight, hold on to it, and that allows the plant to use it for this process of photosynthesis. So those three things, water, H2O, carbon dioxide, CO2, and sunlight, are the three reactants that are needed in order to do the process of photosynthesis. And once the plant has those three things, the process can start. Now, photosynthesis is actually a very complex process, and there's a lot of steps to it. But the good news is you don't need to know that for the MCAS. You just have to know what is needed, which you've just found out, and what is made at the end of photosynthesis. And so let's get into what is made at the end of photosynthesis. There are two products, right? The main one I've been talking about since the video started, and that is glucose, sugars. The plant makes glucose or sugars when this process is completed. And it's going to use that glucose in another process called cell respiration, which we'll review in just a second. So what's the second product of photosynthesis? Well, that would be oxygen molecules. Oxygen is super important, and it's really, really great that plants make oxygen as a product of photosynthesis because we're going to use the oxygen as well when we do cell respiration, which I'll get to in a little bit. So those are two main products, sugars, glucose molecules, and then oxygen molecules. And so where is this all happening? So in plant cells, there is an organelle called the chloroplast. It's right here, zoomed out from this cell. And you can see it's green because we know it has a bunch of chlorophyll in it, those pigment molecules that hold light. And so that is where the entire process is going to happen, in that chloroplast organelle. And only plants have those organelles. So not in animal cells, you're not going to find any chloroplasts. And again, let's just look at the formula because this is something that could come up on the MCAS, or that might just be helpful to think about. And I put it in words and then in the actual chemical symbols. So what is needed to start photosynthesis? Well, we need water, specifically 6 molecules of water, H2O. We need carbon dioxide, or specifically 6 molecules of CO2. And we need sunlight, or photons of sunlight. Once plants have those three things, then plants can do photosynthesis, and then they will make two products at the end: glucose, or C6H12O6, the symbol for one molecule of glucose, and oxygen, specifically 6 molecules of oxygen. It's a good thing to remember so you can kind of remember what it needs, what it makes. That'll help you with a lot of questions that they might ask about photosynthesis. Okay, and so now let's look at cell respiration. These actually kind of go hand in hand, and I kind of mentioned why a little earlier. So cell respiration is another metabolic process that all organisms do, and they do it to make energy molecules that can hold and release energy really, really, really fast. All right, so our bodies are like little machines, and they need energy constantly. And so we have to have that energy available in milliseconds so that it can do what it needs if we're running or playing a sport or thinking really hard and studying for a test or even sleeping or eating or all these different things that are happening in our bodies. They need energy. And so these molecules called ATP are actually molecules that will hold and release energy super fast. Okay, and so cell respiration is a whole process just dedicated to taking the energy out of these glucose molecules and transferring them into these ATP molecules so we have energy available really, really quickly and when we need it. Okay, glucose is a great molecule. It can hold a lot of energy, but to break apart a glucose molecule takes a lot of time. And our bodies don't have that kind of time. They need energy immediately, right away. And so we can't wait around for a glucose to break apart, which is why your cells do this process of cell respiration to front load or have energy molecules ready for you that can break open and give you energy at the exact second that you need it. Okay, and so plants, like I said, will make glucose through photosynthesis. We, as animals, and all the animals will eat food in order to get glucose. And so why is it so important we have glucose? Because that is a starting material or a reactant for this process of cell respiration. So there are two things that we must have that our cells need in order to do cell respiration, and that is glucose, which plants will get from photosynthesis, we'll get from ingesting food, and oxygen, 6 molecules of it. So how are we getting oxygen? We're breathing it in. All right, so we are breathing it in, and that's where we're getting the oxygen. And why are we breathing it in? Because those nice plants released all that oxygen into the atmosphere when they did photosynthesis. Now, plants will also have to kind of breathe it in, but they have those little holes I told you about, the stomata on the bottom of their leaves. So they really just take in the oxygen in the same way that they take in carbon dioxide through those little holes. So they don't have like, a respiratory system, but they do pull in and out the oxygen, carbon dioxide. All right, so once our cells have the oxygen and they have the glucose, then they can do the process of cell respiration. And so the process of cell respiration is going to happen right in your cells, and they're going to happen in these organelles called mitochondria. And so here's a few, 1, 2, 3, 4 mitochondria that are in a cell. And that is where the entire cell respiration process is going to take place. So the glucose will be delivered to these mitochondria, the oxygen will be delivered there, the process can start. Again, cell respiration, another really complex process that you don't have to know for the MCAS. What you have to know is what is made at the end of cell respiration. And so if you look here, I put the formula. What do we make at the end? We make 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, we make 6 molecules of water, and we make 36 ATP molecules, or 36 energy molecules that are holding energy and will release the energy right when we need it for anything else that we're going to be doing. Okay. And so how do we get the carbon dioxide out? Because this is a product, we don't really want carbon dioxide building up in our body. It's not great. And the water, we don't really need either. So these are products, but we don't really need them. And so how do we get the water and the carbon dioxide out? We actually breathe it out. So all the water vapor and carbon dioxide from cell respiration will go to our lungs, and then we will breathe them out through our mouth or our nose. All right. The ATP molecules, our cells are going to keep because that's what they wanted to make. That was the goal. And so they're going to use it for any sort of metabolic processes that happen in your body. Some of the things I listed, the big things like you're working out or you're studying, but even like really small things, just like cell transport. All right. ATP molecules might be needed to open certain protein channels. ATP molecules are needed for communication in your brain cells. So really used almost everywhere in your body. And again, let's look at the formula because that might be something that will be helpful to you in answering any questions about this on the MCAS. So what do we need to start cell respiration in the mitochondria? Well, we need glucose molecule or C6H12O6. We need oxygen molecules, specifically 6 of them. We need, and then we end up making 3 things, 3 molecules at the end. We make carbon dioxide when the process is all done. There's 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. We breathe it out. We make water vapor or water, 6 molecules of it. We breathe it out. And then we make a bunch of energy molecules, 36 of them to be exact. Okay, and so I've been talking a lot about this ATP molecule. And so what is ATP? All right, well, it's super important for one thing, but its full name is adenosine triphosphate. And so you can see that's a mouthful. And so that's why we shorten it to ATP. But ATP is a high energy molecule that is really, really good at holding energy and also really good at breaking apart and letting that energy out the exact second that we need it. Okay, and so here's a little diagram. I did cross this out because this isn't exactly accurate. It's called an adenosine, but an ATP molecule has 1 adenine, so it really should be an adenine, all right, attached to a ribose sugar, which is attached to 3 phosphate molecules. Okay, so you can see essentially here there are 5 molecules attached to each other. We have an adenine, which you might remember from when we talked about DNA. Yes, ATP is a type of nucleic acid, just a kind of funky, weird looking one. So we have an adenine attached to a ribose sugar, attached to 3 phosphates. And notice how these bonds between the phosphates have these little yellow squiggly lines. That's because that's where all the energy is stored. And it seems kind of weird. Like you have this big molecule and in these little bonds is where all the energy is stored. Yep. Specifically, this bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate is where like 90% of the energy is stored. So this is a lot of energy in this little bond right here. And so when we're about to do something, we're going to go for, run or go play soccer or think really hard about something we're studying, even sleeping, any metabolic activity happening in your body, that's when we need ATP. And so our ATP will come along, we'll use it, and how we use it is as soon as we need it, this bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate is going to break apart, and all of this energy is going to flow out, and that's going to power whatever reaction or whatever we needed the energy for in our bodies. Okay, and so now we'll have this little phosphate all by itself, and then we'll have the adenine and the ribose and the 2 phosphates attached, which we call ADP. And so we'll have these separated until these make their way to our mitochondria in our cells, and then cellular respiration will happen again, and it'll put some new energy in between that bond of the 2nd and 3rd phosphate, and then we'll have an ATP again, and then we'll reuse it on something else. Those molecules will find their way back to the mitochondria of a cell respiration will happen, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see this is a constant cycle of basically ATP breaking apart, giving us energy, and then cell respiration happening to put these 2 molecules back together and store it with new energy that we can use again. So really, really important molecule. Okay, and so let's just look really briefly at how carbon moves through the environment from the atmosphere to the biosphere and vice versa. So one of the ways that we see that carbon moves from atmosphere to the biosphere is through plants. Plants need carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis, and so they will pull the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into their cells so that they can do this process. Also remember that if some sort of herbivore, like this cow, were to come over and eat this plant, then they would then get that carbon dioxide, that carbon that was stored in there inside their bodies. And then if some sort of carnivore were to eat this cow, that would happen again. That carbon would be transferred into that organism. Let's also remember that whether it's a plant or an animal, all living things will die at some point. And so when these things die, they will decompose. We will have decomposition happen. And so their cells will break down and will return to the earth as organic material, and they'll eventually build up and form fossil fuels. And we know that humans for many years now have loved to take fossil fuels out of the ground and use them because they are a great source of energy. And so you see that factories all over the world will take fossil fuels and use them for energy and burn them in cars and planes. And so all this fossil fuel burning or fossil fuel combustion puts carbon dioxide right back into the atmosphere. And as you might have learned in Unit 7, or if you haven't gotten there yet, you will learn, is that all this burning or combustion of fossil fuels is having a very negative effect on our environment. This buildup of carbon dioxide is leading to things like global warming and climate change, which are really not good for us. And so what is another way that carbon is cycled through the environment? Well, just by the process of cell respiration. So we know that plants do cell respiration. We know that animals do cell respiration. And so at the end of cell respiration, they've created carbon dioxide, which they will release back into the environment. And so here's just another picture showing all of this, but with a little more detail. It kind of shows the flow of carbon being stored and carbon being processed and returned. So if you want to look at this in a little more detail, you can pause the video and check it out for yourself. Okay, so now let's just get to a couple of practice MCAS questions with these topics in mind. So let's look at this one. Part A of this question has a diagram, which is showing part of the carbon cycle. And here's the question: which of the processes shown in the diagram is responsible for cycling carbon from the atmosphere to the biosphere? Let's pause the video now so you can come up with an answer on your own. Okay, so given our choices here, we have A, combustion, B, decomposition, C, photosynthesis, and D, respiration. The correct answer to this question is C. Photosynthesis is the only one of those 4 that actually cycles carbon from the atmosphere into the biosphere by those plants taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, putting them into their cells to use for photosynthesis. Okay, next question. We're looking at the same diagram, different question. Which of the following occurs during decomposition? Pause the video now so that you can come up with an answer. Okay, and we're looking at those four choices. A, carbon is dissolved in water to form a solution. B, carbon is stored in animals as complex carbon compounds. C, carbon compounds are absorbed by plant roots from the soil. Or D, carbon compounds are broken down into simpler substances. The correct answer for this is D. This is the only answer that refers to anything having to do with decomposition. All right, let's look at this next question. So this is showing a graph. Graphs and diagrams are very common on the MCAS, and interpreting them is also a really important part to answer the question. So this graph shows the effect of temperature on the rate of carbon dioxide production in plant cells as a result of cell respiration. So here, they're having you use the rate of carbon dioxide production to measure how much cell respiration is happening. Because remember, carbon dioxide is one of the products of cell respiration. Based on the graph, select the response that correctly completes each statement. When temperature increases, the rate at which glucose is used by cells is expected to. Pause the video now so you can come up with an answer on your own. Okay, so the correct answer for this question would be B, increase. So if we look at the graph, we see that when the temperature increases, there is more carbon dioxide being made. So as the temperature goes up, there is more CO2 production. So that tells us that if more CO2 is being made, there must be more cellular respiration happening. And what do we know about glucose? Glucose is a starting material or a reactant of cell respiration. We need glucose in order to do it. So if we're having more CO2, which is telling us that there's more cell respiration going on, then that means the rate we're using glucose must also be going up. All right, so the answer is B, increase. And let's look at this last question, same graph. When temperature decreases, the rate of ATP production by cells is expected to. Pause the video now so you can come up with an answer on your own. Hey, the correct answer for this question is A, decrease. And again, look at the graph. When temperature is going down, we notice that the rate of CO2 production is also going down, okay? If CO2 production is going down, that means that cell respiration production and it happening is not happening as much. It's going down, okay? So there's not as much cell respiration going on. All right, now what do we know about ATP production? Well, ATP is another product of cell respiration like CO2. So if we're not making as much CO2, we're also not making as much ATP because they are both products of the same reaction. This means that the rate of ATP production by cells is decreasing. Very good. So I hope that was helpful and good luck on the MCAS.